Right, so in this lesson we're going to talk about another British socialist philosopher, Anthony Crosland, and we are going to talk about how he implemented some of the more Keynesian, so I believe that would be the third way, I believe, one of the third way ideologies anyway, which prioritised Keynesian economics over traditional Marxist capitalism and Marxist value theory. He was a Labour politician, and he's probably the most interesting one I would recommend you talk about in your exams. There's a lot of debate within his philosophy that you could directly link to ideas of stuff like neoliberalism and its advocacy of laissez-faire capitalism, and you can directly link this to, say, the debate between Keynesian economics v. the economic ideas of the Austrians, like Friedrich von Hayek. And if you know about them, that is a lot of stuff to write. But if you don't know about them, don't worry, because we have an entire slide, which is fairly lengthy in this lesson, discussing the basic differences between Keynesian and Austrian economics. So, let's get into it. Anthony Crosland, who lived between 1918 and 1977. Anthony Crosland and common ownership. Anthony Crosland was a Labour politician who served as a cabinet minister on the Labour government of the 1960s and 1970s. He wrote a book called The Future of Socialism in 1956, which heavily influenced the path of social democracy in Britain. Crosland supported the notion that common ownership had gone far enough in Britain. This is essentially the creation of national industries controlled by the government. So he believed that it had gone far enough. No more nationalisation of private industry. He believed that common ownership was never an objective of socialism. It was merely a tactic necessary to end the capitalist state. Crosland instead believed that economic equality should instead be achieved by the socialist state, rather than the pursuit of common ownership. You can likely see the concept of progressive taxation influencing Crosland's philosophy. And if you're interested in the exam, you can link this idea of progressive taxation to the strand of liberalism known as modern liberalism, and obviously the influence John Rawls had on that. So, let's get into the difference between Keynesian and Austrian economics. John Maynard Keynes to the left, Friedrich von Hayek to the right. So, Anthony Crosland and Keynesian economics. Anthony Crosland contested that British socialism had been forever changed by the economic principles of the economist John Maynard Keynes. Keynesian economics had become an integral facet of most Western socialist movements, as it argued for state control over the economy, taxation, low interest rates, and a minimum wage to ensure consumerism. Many Western socialists, like Crosland, believed that Keynesian economic policies could now ensure permanent economic growth and full employment without the necessity of common ownership. And obviously, famously, Keynesian economic strategies were used by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to deal with the Great Depression, which came after 1929 and the Wall Street crash, and obviously it had profound influences on his New Deal. So, Keynesian economics stipulates that the government should tax the population and subsidize businesses. It is also advocated that welfare schemes, which would provide the taxed with more income, thus increasing aggregate demand for goods, which could be spent on businesses benefiting both parties. So essentially the workers and the business owners being taxed, then that money goes to the government and it's given back to the businesses and given back to the workers in the form of welfare, which increases demand for goods from the businesses, and it perpetuates the cycle. Keynesian economics depends upon mass consumerism in order to maintain the economic growth. Hence, the low interest rates, as saving up money was counterintuitive to the Keynesian model. Austrian economists such as Friedrich von Hayek would contest Keynesian doctrine as flawed due to the fact that the welfare merely inflated consumer demand temporarily, thus creating a boom and bust cycle. Hayek also believed that a minimum wage would create sticky wages, which worsened the eventual recession when the economy began to shrink in on itself, as employers could not fluctuate wages to compensate for profit fluctuations based on a decrease in consumer demand for their product. This meant that employers would be forced to lay off employees rather than dock their wages, thus further decreasing consumer demand and sending a ripple effect throughout the rest of the economy. It should be noted that Austrian economics is the opposite to Keynesian economics. Crosland was a Keynesian. I have merely introduced the ideas of Hayek to demonstrate the critiques of Keynesian economics and Keynesian economic theory. So, I hope that's given you a good overview of the difference between Keynesian and Austrian-style economics. So, Anthony Crosland and the class struggle. Crosland argued that the changing fabric of British society since the Industrial Revolution meant that Marx's views on the classes were no longer applicable to modern society. Crosland believed that the new classes emerged in the 20th century, such as technocrats and managers, whom had far different attitudes to the traditional bourgeoisie. He believed that socialism now required a mixed economy, which would consist primarily of private enterprise and private ownership. He believed that these private enterprises would exist in tandem with a small number of industries and services owned by the state. Crosland believed that most of the national industries and services he intended to exist had already been introduced by the Labour government of 1945 to 1951. He believed that future socialist governments should focus more on state spending rather than state industry. So once again, summing up the idea that he believes nationalisation has gone far enough, and the need for more Keynesian approaches to economics by the government. So, finally, Crosland and Comprehensive Education. In his book, The Conservative Enemy of 1962, Crosland discusses the issue of education in depth. He argued for a new form of comprehensive education provided by the state, which would educate the working class past the age of 11. He believed that these improvements to education would diminish class divisions and would ensure all students equality of opportunity, indiscriminate of their class. Crosland pursued his aim of comprehensive education for all while he served as Secretary of State between 1965 and 1967. Thus beginning a process that would be complete upon his death in 1977. So that's it for Anthony Crosland. He's probably one of the more important socialist philosophers that you can talk about in your essay, because if you're given a question asking to compare, say, socialism and liberalism, there are loads of stuff you can talk about within his philosophy. So comparing his advocacy of Keynesian economics to the neoliberal advocacy of Austrian economics, is a difference between the two ideologies and their breeds that came about in the 20th century, Or if you want to talk about a similarity between the two, you can talk about his advocacy of progressive taxation and how that is shared by the modern liberals such as John Rawls. So that's it for Anthony Crosland. Thank you.